Our next guest is Democratic Congresswoman from Connecticut's 5th District, Jahana Hayes. I'm a little upset at Jahana Hayes, actually, folks, because I've interviewed her before, and you did not drop on me that you were the 2016 National Teacher of the Year. I mean, I knew you had been a teacher, but I didn't know you were like a big deal teacher. So it's really great to be with you. I don't forget what we're talking about, but I loved our conversation last time, but this was not part of the deal. So, I know that you are working, Representative Hayes, on the questions of what can we do to be supportive of teachers who are on the front line. As we think about, labor shortages and the labor gap in this country, we talk about men and women with children at home and with the issues of childcare and how difficult it is to get out, that across the board, we've got gaps and shortages across this country in lots of job areas. So you're trying to lighten the load, help it. Tell us about your concerns about teachers on the front line today, because I got to tell you, when I talk to superintendents, there is a lot of problems with retention right now.
Well, thanks for having me back. And I think the answer to my question is exactly what you just said. The reason why you didn't know that I was the National Teacher of the Year the last time we spoke is because with teachers, it's never about the teachers. It's always about the students and the learning and what we can do to invest in our children and the next generation of leaders. And that is something that I think it's not just teachers, just across all communities. People forget about the people who are actually doing the work and being put in front of children. So as we think about the impacts of this pandemic and what the last 2 years have meant for educators, we have to think about, the emotional well-being of teachers, about making sure that they are supported in their classrooms. One of the first pieces of legislation that I introduced at the beginning of this pandemic was Save Education Jobs Act, because I knew that when school districts were faced with budget cuts and restraints and constraints, the first to go would be the guidance counselors, the social workers, the behavior techs, all of those support personnel that help, our academic subject area teachers do the work that they need to do. All of those people, the school nurses, are a part of the school community. We have legislation to raise teacher pay, to infuse the educator pipeline by supporting, HBCUs and minority serving institutions, to making sure that when our professionals get in front of our children, they have all of the resources that they need, they have the background to support them. And when they're in the classroom, they have, the administrative and community supports that are necessary. I can tell you it's been painful over the last 2 years to see teachers celebrated as heroes. They're out in communities delivering Chromebooks and textbooks and visiting with their students, and then being blamed for being too lazy to go back and not wanting to reopen the schools when they ask questions about their safety and the safety of their family members. That should not be a parsed conversation. We should be supporting the people that we put in front of our children, because ultimately our kids are the ones who benefit.
I so respect your work on trying to help relieve teacher student loan debt. I don't know the size of that debt. I know we've been discussing nationally, when we had the presidential election, talking about, student loan debt overall. I know Elizabeth Warren's been working on this, but I hadn't thought about, to tell you the truth, how vital teachers are, and that they themselves would have significant student loan debt. And it kind of gets back into this question of, what are we prioritizing in the country? So my question to you is, how's the reception to that be? I mean, I think if President Biden and a couple of Republicans and a couple of Democrats came out and said this would seem to me to be an easy one to get. Am I wrong?
Nothing is easy here. And I'm so happy you brought that up, because it was one of the things that I was criticized in my campaign for carrying student loan debt. And I thought, but I just wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to go to school. And having been the first in my family to go to college, the only way for me to do that was to take on Pell Grants and student loans. In this administration, we were able to increase the amount of Pell Grants, and I just introduced legislation so that teachers, educators could simultaneously enroll in public service loan forgiveness. But just for a greater appreciation of this, I taught in the state of Connecticut, and in my state, you had to have a master's degree in order to maintain teacher certification. So within the first 5 years of teaching, I had to go on and get a master's degree. So, and I went to community college, I went to state university, and then public university. So nothing extravagant. But by the time I finished, I came out with almost $70,000 in student loan debt for a job that was going to start me off at $31,000. So if we're going to attract the most highly qualified professionals to this field, we have to do something different. There are so many people when you're looking at, in the STEM fields, people with advanced science and math degrees, these highly specialized professionals. And I saw at my school when we were trying to recruit people for whether it be IT personnel, to teach in our business department, or automotive personnel to teach, in our trades department. It was always difficult to attract those professionals because they could always find more money in the private sector. And I remind people, teaching is not mission work. This idea that the love of teaching and the love of children is enough to fuel, educators to stay in the classroom. I've seen so many of my peers and colleagues and friends in education who, as a result of this pandemic, have just had to leave because they can no longer sustain their own family. I've seen teachers when they start a family of their own and have children, have to leave the classroom because they can't find affordable childcare for themselves. These are all the things that we need to consider when we talk about investments in education. Just making sure that the people who are making the decision, are not martyrs, if you will. But we have to. I'm excited that this administration, that the Secretary Cardona is really taking seriously the conversation about what are we doing to support and attract people, because otherwise we'll only end up with educators in the classroom where money's not an issue, where they had a family that could send them to college. And what we need is everyone. We need people from all backgrounds, all walks of lives in front of our students. And for someone like me, again, being the first in my family to go to college, I relied on student loans. I relied on Pell Grants. So there has to be, until we figure out how to make higher education more affordable, there has to be a way that is sustainable for educators.
That one of the things that strike me, you're a high school teacher, as you said, first educated. You're known for saying education saved your life. You're now a member of Congress, which most people look at as a pretty good deal. I don't know if you heard my conversation with Charlene Russell Tucker, the commissioner for the state of Connecticut, state of Board of Department of Education. We have Mikhail Cardona, also from Connecticut. Connecticut's kind of in the game here a lot, and I'm fascinated by that because I don't think we designed it, but it does mean that something within the educational ecosystem of Connecticut seems right, that seems impressive, that whatever. And I guess in a way not bragging, but basically looking at, what can we shore up by way of how education has real traction in people's lives. Because I look at education today as a politically stressed out subject, like crazy politics right now in education. I'm just interested in how we get on a constructive track in a state as opposed to the stressed out, exhausted state that I see in much of the country. I don't know if you have any insights into that, but would love to hear.
Well, let me start by saying Connecticut is definitely in the game. And there is a through line between the folks that you just mentioned, Commissioner Russell Tucker and Secretary Cardona, and it is that we all are of the community in which we served. Secretary Cardona was in the Meriden Public Schools, was a school administrator, was a teacher, was a principal, and then went to work for the state of Connecticut. Same with Dr. Russell Tucker. I worked in, and when I say education saved my life, I absolutely mean it. In the public housing complex the projects that I grew up in, many of my friends, many of the people I grew up with, just have not had good outcomes, died, have gone to jail, are addicted on some level to drugs, have just had a rough life. So I credit everything that has happened to me with just being invested in an education, with supportive teachers and community members that saw something in me. And I think that's why it is so important to get people who are of these communities back in our schools in front of people. It made all the difference at my school that I was from that city, that I had lived there, that I had grew up there. It helped me to connect to young people and was encouraging and uplifting for them as they struggled to find their way and their footing. The same thing with the other people that you just mentioned. So really getting people not only to choose a profession of education, but then also choose to return to their communities. Because for me at my school, there were so many people who lived in the outskirts, commuted in, and just had a very different perspective on the students that we served. So as we get more and more of people from those communities, and some of them, most of them are in the highest need communities. When I was named the National Teacher of the Year, I had job offers from everywhere, from all over the state, from just education, just different stakeholders in education. And I chose to stay in my school district. I wanted to work at the Waterbury Public School, and my kids would ask me all the time, or say to me all the time, "You picked us." And, I assured them, yes, absolutely, I picked you. So we have to do more to infuse the pipeline, to encourage people from who are the most highly qualified to work in our most challenging school districts. And I think that in Connecticut, that has happened a lot. People are invested in their communities. There's a different level of investment in equity and the challenges that we face. And I think that is something that we have to get as part of the national policy conversation. When I think about education, I don't think about it as political. I think about it as just our responsibility. It is policy. It is making the financial investments that are necessary to support student academic success, to support educators, to close the achievement gap, to close the equity gap on the physical spaces that people are learning in. All of those things are just real and important to me because I know the consequences of inaction. And I am fortunate that I come from a state where I had so many tremendous partners in doing this work.
Let me ask you finally, Representative Hayes, completely off subject, but I think it is on subject in certain ways, which is civil society, thinking about what, educating our children about, democracy, civics, all the, the struggle over what that means. And you were, in the room, so to speak, when President Zelensky of Ukraine spoke the other day. And I'm just interested, as you talk to your constituents, do they care about Ukraine? Do they feel connected about what's going on? How were you moved or not moved by President Zelensky's comments the other day?
My constituents absolutely care about what is going on in Ukraine. And again, we have a moral responsibility to help our neighbors. I think that we were traveling down a dangerous path where, every man for himself. And, as long as my family is okay, I don't care what is happening to my neighbor. And then we got hit with a global pandemic where we recognized that we are all interconnected. One of the reasons that I was selected as National Teacher of the Year is because I created a club called the Hope Club, which was called Helping Out People Everywhere. It was an acronym, and it was a volunteer service club. And the goal of this club was to take kids who had from in a Title I inner city urban public school district, kids who had spent their entire life on the receiving end of aid, and show them that they too could be the givers. That was important to me. And as a result, they started to thrive academically. And, the work that I was doing in the classroom and at my school got noticed on a national scale. That is a much smaller example, but it kind of has the same through line that, we have a responsibility, especially in education, to use our gifts or to be of service, to provide help to other people. President Zelensky's message was just that, that he said something that was, so incredibly powerful for me. He said, "I am almost 45 years old." He said, "but my heart stopped beating when the hearts of 100 children in Ukraine stopped beating." And the images of civilians and children just being brutally killed is something that the global community has a moral responsibility to respond to. I am deeply troubled by what is happening, but also I think that it reminds us that we have to stay engaged at all times in global diplomacy. We have to be partners on the world stage. We cannot have this, America alone agenda where we ignore the challenges of other countries, because this is what we end up with at our doorstep. So I think that the world has been put on notice that our humanity is all intertwined, and we have a responsibility to step in when human rights are violated anywhere in the world.
Well, listen, I started this conversation. It's very powerful, and thank you for sharing that. It's just, it's hard to not get emotional. I am emotional, but I guess this. I started off frustrated with you that you and I didn't know this cool stuff about you. I just want you to know we're cool now. We're back to even. So, Jahana Hayes, representative in the U.S. House of Representatives from Connecticut, 2016 National Teacher of the Year Award. It was so great to have you on right after Autumn Rivera, who's up for that potential distinction as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad I can make it right.
Thank you.